Colton stood in front of the lab door, his fingers crackling with electricity.
Stand back.
He gathered an immense amount of energy in his hand and unleashed a powerful surge of lightning straight into the lock. The bolt was so intense it melted the metal instantly, sending a shockwave reverberating down the hallway. The force of the blast knocked dust from the ceiling and the air hummed with static. Zach and Chris flinched, taking a step back as the sheer power of the attack hit them.
Dude, maybe a little less showboating next time?
Yeah, I thought we were going for subtle. That was anything but.
Colton shrugged, a playful smirk on his face.
Sometimes subtlety's overrated. Now let's get this done.
With the door now melted and hanging slightly ajar, they pushed it open and stepped inside the lab. The room was a maze of high-tech equipment, glowing screens and beakers filled with strange substances. But the center of the room held the real target, the cloning machine. It stood tall, a menacing construct of glass, metal and dark energy, humming ominously.
That's the thing. We need to destroy it, now.
Without hesitation, Zach focused his telekinesis, his hand raised as he summoned his powers. The machine trembled, then lifted off the ground as if it weighed nothing. He gritted his teeth, veins pulsing in his forehead from the effort. With a final push, he threw the machine across the room, smashing it into the far wall with a deafening crash. Glass shards and pieces of metal exploded in all directions, scattering across the lab.
That's one way to do it.
Colton grinned, stepping forward as arcs of electricity danced across his hands.
Let's make sure it stays broken.
He gathered the most power he'd ever summoned before, enough to rival 10 thunderstorms. The air around him crackled with energy as the lights flickered and dimmed. With a thunderous shout, Colton unleashed a massive lightning bolt straight into the remains of the cloning machine. The bolt struck with such intensity that the room itself shook, and the machine melted instantly into a puddle of molten metal and shattered glass. The sheer power of the strike left scorch marks along the walls and floor, the smell of ozone filling the air.
I think that did the job.
Chris walked over to the smoldering remains of the machine, kicking a piece of debris with his boot.
It's done, the cloning machine's gone.
Upstairs in the conference room, Plasma Man's eyes narrowed as a distant boom echoed through the building, followed by a strange tremor beneath their feet. His smile faded instantly, replaced by cold suspicion. He stood abruptly, his chair screeching across the floor.
What was that?
Plasma Man's gaze darkened.
I think we have uninvited guests on the 8th floor.
Mr. Rence, seeing the shift in Plasma Man's demeanor, stood quickly.
I'm sure it's nothing. Let's stay focused on the negotiation.
But Plasma Man wasn't having any of it. His eyes gleamed with rage as he strode toward the door.
No, something is wrong. I'll check it myself.
Mr. Dugan stepped forward, blocking Plasma Man's path.
We agreed to a peaceful negotiation. There's no need to escalate things.
Plasma Man didn't slow down, brushing past him with a forceful shove.
Out of my way. I knew something was off.
Mr. Callaway joined in, trying to reason with him.
Plasma Man, this won't end well for either of us if we escalate now. Let's talk about this.
Plasma Man turned, his eyes glowing with fury.
You've already escalated it, Callaway. If your team has tampered with anything on the 8th floor, the consequences will be yours to bear.
Without another word, Plasma Man stormed out of the conference room and made his way to the elevator, Mr. Rence, Mr. Dugan, and Mr. Callaway following closely behind, trying to keep him from reaching the lab. But Plasma Man was insistent, his patience long gone. As he stepped into the hallway on the 8th floor, his eyes immediately fell on the unconscious body of the opposite lord, wrapped tightly in the vines Chris had summoned earlier. Plasma Man's face contorted with rage.
What is this?
With a flick of his wrist, he summoned a searing ball of plasma energy and hurled it at the vines. The plasma ball hit with such force that the vines shriveled and burned away in an instant, releasing the opposite lord from her binds. She gasped as she was freed, her body weak from the earlier fight. Plasma Man knelt beside her.
Who did this?
The opposite lord coughed weakly, her voice barely a whisper.
It was the heroes. They found the lab and destroyed the machine.
Plasma Man's fists clenched so tightly that they glowed with white-hot energy. His voice was a low, furious growl.
They've destroyed everything.
Without hesitation, Plasma Man stood, his body crackling with raw power as he turned toward the direction of the lab.
I'll make them pay for this.
Plasma Man stormed into the lab, his eyes blazing with fury as he took in the scene before him. The cloning machine lay in ruins on the floor, its parts scattered in a mess of molten metal and shattered glass. Standing over the wreckage were Colton, Zach, Chris, and the amplifier, all of them looking satisfied with their work. Colton, lightning still crackling faintly around his hands, smirked when he saw Plasma Man enter.
Looks like your machine's a little broken.
Zach stood beside him, arms crossed.
Not so revolutionary anymore, huh?
Chris gave a short nod, still catching his breath.
It's done. You've lost, Plasma Man.
But Plasma Man was beyond words. His face contorted in rage, his fists glowing with raw plasma energy. He let out a furious shout that echoed through the room.
You fools! You think this is over? I'll make you suffer for what you've done.
Without warning, he turned to the opposite lord, who had staggered into the room behind him, still weakened from her earlier battle.
Attack them. Full force. Use their weaknesses against them.
The opposite lord's eyes flickered with a dangerous gleam as she straightened herself, feeding off Plasma Man's energy. She summoned the last of her strength, focusing her powers on each of the heroes, attacking them with their elemental opposites. First she turned to Colton. The air around her shimmered as she summoned a torrent of water from the very air itself, swirling it into a massive wave.
Let's see how well your lightning does against this.
Before Colton could react, the wave surged toward him, slamming into his body with a crushing force. The water sizzled as it came into contact with the residual electricity around him, but the sheer volume of it overwhelmed his powers. Colton gasped for breath, trying to summon his lightning, but the water drowned it out, extinguishing his crackling energy. He staggered backward, struggling to stay on his feet. Zack, seeing Colton in trouble, tried to move forward to help, but before he could take a step, the opposite lord focused her power on him. With a wicked smile, she used the opposite of his telekinesis, binding him with an invisible force that held him completely in place.
I can't move.
The opposite lord's voice was cold and mocking.
You think you're the master of movement, but now you can't even lift a finger.
Zack strained against the invisible bonds, trying to summon his telekinesis, but it was useless. He was completely paralyzed, held in place by the very power he normally controlled so effortlessly. Next, the opposite lord turned her attention to Chris. Her eyes glowed with dark energy as she summoned rocks and stones from the floor, hurling them at him with devastating force. The rocks pelted Chris, each impact sending him stumbling backward, his grasp powers useless against the hard stone. The ground beneath him cracked and shifted, and he struggled to stay standing as more and more rocks bombarded him. Chris groaned in pain, raising a hand to summon vines to defend himself, but the opposite lord was relentless.
Your plants are nothing compared to the power of the earth.
She hissed, sending a boulder crashing into his side, knocking him to the ground. The amplifier, seeing her teammates overwhelmed, tried to boost their powers, but the opposite lord, feeding off the negative energy of the opposites, countered her amplification. Each time the amplifier tried to boost their strength, the opposite lord twisted it, turning it against them.
I can't get a charge. She's drowning me out. I can't break free. She's using my own powers against me.
She's too strong.
The opposite lord stood tall, feeding off the chaos she had unleashed. With a cruel smile, she raised her hands again, preparing to deal the final blow.
You thought you could defeat us? Now you'll all fall to the power of your own weaknesses.
Plasma Man watched from the doorway, his rage turning to satisfaction as he saw his enemies brought low.
You destroyed my machine, but you'll pay for that with your lives.
The situation was dire, and the heroes knew they had to act fast if they were going to turn the tide. The opposite lord was more dangerous than they had realized, and now, with her amplified powers, she was practically unstoppable. Time was running out.
As the battle raged in the lab, with Plasma Man and the opposite lord focused on dismantling Colton, Zack, and Chris, Mr. Rence saw his opportunity. He had been hiding in the shadows near the doorway, observing the chaos, waiting for the right moment to strike. Plasma Man's attention was completely absorbed by the punishment he was dishing out to the heroes, his smug satisfaction evident as he watched his enemies struggle. Mr. Rence's eyes gleamed with determination as he silently slipped into the room, staying low and out of sight. His ability to shapeshift had come in handy many times, but this situation called for something bold, something big. He focused his power, his body shifting and expanding, metal forming where his skin had once been. In seconds, he transformed into an old-fashioned, fully loaded cannon. Now crouched in the form of a massive cannon, Mr. Rence tilted his barrel toward Plasma Man, ready to strike. The cannon sat still, heavy and imposing, but Plasma Man and the opposite lord were too distracted by the ongoing fight to notice. From the back of the room, Mr. Callaway had followed Mr. Rence in, his eyes widening at the sight of the shape-shifted cannon. He immediately understood the plan. Staying calm in the heat of battle, Mr. Callaway moved into position. Mr. Rence, set me off. Aim straight for Plasma Man. Mr. Callaway didn't hesitate. He crouched down beside the cannon, his hands glowing faintly with energy. With a swift motion, he lit the fuse, his powers fueling the ignition. The room was filled with the quiet hiss of the fuse burning down. Mr. Rence, ready, aim, fire! A loud boom. The cannon fired, launching a heavy cannonball directly toward Plasma Man. The ball cut through the air with deadly precision, the sound of the cannon echoing off the walls of the lab. Plasma Man, caught entirely off guard, barely had time to react. The cannonball slammed into him with incredible force, sending Plasma Man flying across the room. He crashed into the far wall with a sickening thud, plasma energy sparking and fizzling around him as he collapsed to the ground. The impact left a crater in the wall where he hit, and for a moment, the powerful villain lay still, stunned by the sheer force of the blow.
What?
But before she could react, Colton, Zack, and Chris saw their chance. The cannon's blast had momentarily broken her concentration, and Colton quickly summoned a surge of lightning, breaking free from the water that had been holding him back. He raised his hand and sent a powerful bolt of electricity crackling toward the opposite lord. The amplifier, seeing the opening, quickly boosted Colton's power, amplifying the strength of his attack tenfold. The lightning struck the opposite lord with immense force, sending her staggering backward, electricity coursing through her body. Zack, now free from her telekinetic hold, took the opportunity to lift a chunk of debris with his powers and hurled it at the opposite lord, knocking her to the ground. Chris followed up with a final strike, summoning vines from the shattered lab floor to wrap around her, binding her tightly in place. The opposite lord struggled, her face contorted with fury, but it was too late. She was trapped, and her powers, weakened by the overwhelming attacks, could no longer keep up.
Nice shot, Rence. Mr. Rence, I always hit my mark.
Plasma Man's down, and the opposite lord's restrained. We've got them. Zack, we need to make sure they don't get back up. That cannonball hit Plasma Man hard, but he's tough. Chris, we'll deal with them, but we need to make sure the rest of the Villain League doesn't come after us while we're doing it. I'll keep your powers boosted. We've got the upper hand now. Let's make sure it stays that way.
Together, the team regrouped, standing over their fallen enemies. Plasma Man, still dazed from the cannonball, stirred slightly, but he was in no condition to fight back. The opposite lord remained tangled in Chris's vines, her furious eyes burning with hatred, but she was powerless to stop them. The heroes had won this battle, but the war with the Villain League was far from over. As the dust settled from the intense fight, the heroes barely had a moment to catch their breath before the door to the lab creaked open. The snake slithered into the room with a slow, menacing movement, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous light. His forked tongue flickered out, tasting the air, and his sinister smile widened as he saw the chaos that had unfolded. The heroes instinctively tensed, already drained from the battle. Colton, Zack, Chris, and the others stood ready, but something about the snake's presence sent a shiver down their spines.
Well, what do we have here? It seems you've made quite the mess.
Back off, Snake. You're too late. The cloning machine is destroyed.
Oh, I'm not here for the machine. I'm here for you.
He took a step forward, his movements eerily smooth, and revealed his fangs, which glistened with venom.
I could bite each and every one of you right now. Inject enough venom into your bodies to paralyze you for hours, perhaps even kill you.
The room fell silent, and the tension skyrocketed. The heroes, already exhausted, felt a fresh wave of fear wash over them. They knew that if the snake got close enough, his bite could end this fight, and maybe even their lives. Zack, you wouldn't dare.
Oh, I would. And none of you could stop me.
The heroes were momentarily frozen, unsure of how to handle this new threat. And in that moment of hesitation, Plasma Man saw his opportunity. With a grunt of effort, Plasma Man, still weakened from Mr. Rence's cannonball attack, slowly raised his fist. He staggered to his feet, his plasma energy flickering around him as he turned toward the large window that overlooked the city below. Before any of the heroes could react, Plasma Man let out a shout and swung his fist forward with all the strength he could muster. His glowing fist collided with the window, shattering the glass in a violent explosion. The sudden noise startled everyone in the room, and the heroes were caught off guard, their focus momentarily diverted by the chaos. Glass shards flew in all directions, and the wind howled as it rushed into the room from the broken window. Plasma Man didn't waste a second. He sprinted toward the window, his movements slow and labored but filled with determination.
Stop him!
With a final glance back at the heroes, Plasma Man leaped out of the window, disappearing into the air. The group rushed to the edge, peering out in disbelief. Zack, did he just jump? Chris, Can he even survive a fall from an 8th-story window?
Knowing Plasma Man, he'll find a way, he always does.
The heroes stood at the shattered window for a moment longer, but there was no sign of Plasma Man below. They exchanged uneasy glances, knowing that letting him escape was a dangerous loose end. Before they could regroup, however, the opposite lord, still wrapped in Chris's vines, seized her chance. While the heroes were distracted by Plasma Man's dramatic escape, she summoned the last of her energy. With a fierce shout, the opposite lord unleashed one final attack, using the opposite of their powers. She summoned water to douse Colton's lightning, causing him to stumble back, unable to maintain his charge. She sent a wave of force against Zack, holding him in place once again, freezing him where he stood. And she hurled rocks and stones at Chris, knocking him down as he struggled to defend himself. The amplifier tried to boost their powers, but the opposite lord's mastery over the opposites was too strong. The vines holding her snapped, and she broke free, her eyes blazing with determination.
I'm not going down that easily.
With a final fierce glare at the group, she darted toward the broken window. Colton, Zack, and Chris tried to recover from the attack, but they were too slow. The opposite lord leaped out of the window, disappearing into the night just as Plasma Man had done.
We lost them both.
They're gone, but we destroyed the cloning machine. That was the priority.
Yeah, but Plasma Man and the opposite lord are still out there. This isn't over. They'll regroup. And when they do, they'll come back stronger.
We'll be ready. You all fought hard today. The cloning machine is gone, and that's a major victory.
We took a big step forward today. But make no mistake, Plasma Man will come back, and next time, he'll be more dangerous than ever. The team, though bruised and weary, knew that this battle had been a victory, but the war was far from over. Plasma Man and the opposite lord had escaped, and the Villain League would regroup. But for now they had dismantled the cloning operation, and that gave the Hero League some breathing room.
Next time we won't let them get away.
And with that, the group prepared to leave the lab, knowing that the fight was far from finished, but ready to face whatever came next. Late that night, Plasma Boy sat alone in the wrecked laboratory, the faint glow from the few remaining intact machines casting eerie shadows on the walls. The lab was in complete disarray. Shattered glass, twisted metal, and scorched floor tiles were all that remained of the Villain League's once powerful cloning machine. Plasma Boy, though furious about the loss, was focused on cleaning up the mess left behind by the Hero League. As he sifted through the wreckage, trying to salvage what little could be saved, a faint hum came from his communicator. He pulled out the secure line device from his pocket and placed it in his ear. His father's voice, cold and distant, came through.
Son, are you there? Yeah, Dad, I'm here cleaning up what's left of our precious lab. You've got a lot of explaining to do. I know the machine is destroyed. The Hero League got the upper hand today, but this isn't the end. Could have fooled me. They wrecked everything. What's the plan now? I'm going to disappear for a while. I've arranged to lay low in Afghanistan. It's one of the few places where the Hero League doesn't have a presence, and it'll be impossible for them to track me there. Afghanistan? You're really going into hiding? It's a tactical retreat. The Hero League will be hunting for me after what happened tonight. They'll be out for blood, and right now we need to regroup. I'll be unreachable for a while, but I'm trusting you to look over things while I'm gone. You want me to run the Villain League after what just happened? Yes, I don't have a choice. You've trained for this moment. I need you to take charge and keep the Villain League functioning until it's safe for me to return. This isn't a loss, son. It's just a setback. We'll rebuild, and when the time is right, we'll strike back harder. Fine. I'll take care of things while you're gone, but you better have a plan when you come back, or we're going to lose a lot more than just a cloning machine. I always have a plan, son. Trust me. What about the others? The opposite lord, the snake. They're going to want answers. They'll fall in line. They've been with us long enough to know that setbacks like this don't break us. They'll support you. The Hero League thinks they've won, but they don't realize they've only delayed the inevitable. When the time comes, you'll be ready. Keep things under control while I'm gone. I'll keep things running. But next time, I'm making sure we're the ones who catch them off guard. That's what I like to hear. You know what needs to be done. I'll contact you again when it's safe. Until then, you're in charge. I've got it, Dad. Don't worry. Good.
Plasma Man said, and with that, the line went dead. Plasma Boy stood in the silence of the ruined lab, staring at the mess around him. The destruction left behind by the Hero League was a bitter reminder of the power they wielded. But he was determined to turn things around. His father was counting on him, and he wasn't about to let the Villain League crumble under his watch.
Time to show them what happens when they mess with us.
The heroes, exhausted and bruised, arrived back at Hero League headquarters at 4 a.m. The van pulled into the underground parking lot, and as the team stepped out, their movements were slow and weary. The battle had taken a toll on them, but they had completed the mission. Now, despite the hour, they had to report back to Carl and Connor. They walked through the quiet halls of the headquarters, the normally bustling building now silent in the early morning. Colton, Zach, Chris, Mr. Rence, Mr. Dugan, Mr. Callaway, and the Amplifier trudged to Carl's office, each lost in their own thoughts about the mission. They knew they had succeeded, but the escape of Plasma Man and the opposite Lord weighed heavily on their minds. When they reached Carl's office, the door was already open, and inside, both Carl and Connor were waiting for them, as if they had known the group would be back at that very moment. The two leaders sat behind the desk, their expressions calm but expectant. Carl's sharp eyes scanned each of the returning heroes as they filed into the room.
You're back. We expected you. How did it go?
It was a tough mission, but we got the job done.
We ran into trouble during the negotiations. Plasma Man wasn't interested in playing nice. He tried to stall, but we knew something was off, so we made our move. What happened in the conference room?
Plasma Man and the Snake were there, along with Plasma Boy and the opposite Lord. We tried to negotiate, but Plasma Man wasn't having any of it. He didn't want to give up the cloning machine without something bigger in return. We knew we had to make a move before things escalated.
And then, while they were distracted with the negotiation, Zach, Chris, and I searched the building. It took us a while, but we finally found the lab on the 8th floor. It was heavily guarded, but we took care of that. Of course, it wasn't that simple. The opposite Lord ambushed us. She hit us with everything she had, using the opposite of our powers to throw us off. Colton took a hit from water, Zach was locked down with his own power, and I got hammered with stones. The opposite Lord again? How did you get past her? It wasn't easy. She had us pinned down, but with the Amplifier's help, we managed to overpower her. Once she was down, we destroyed the cloning machine. We didn't hold back. Colton hit it with a lightning bolt strong enough to melt it into the floor. So, the cloning machine is gone. That's good news. It wasn't over after that. Plasma Man showed up right after we destroyed the machine. He was furious. What happened?
Plasma Man tried to stop us, but we managed to keep him at bay. I even shapeshifted into a cannon and blasted him pretty good.
But the Snake showed up, threatening us with his venom. While we were focused on him, Plasma Man escaped by smashing through a window and jumping from the 8th floor. We couldn't stop him. Is Plasma Man dead? An 8-story fall? Even for him? We don't know. Knowing him though, he probably survived. The opposite Lord escaped too. She attacked us one last time before she jumped out the same window. You destroyed the cloning machine, which was the main objective. That's a victory, and you should all be proud of what you accomplished tonight, but Plasma Man and the opposite Lord are still out there. This isn't over. You've taken a big step forward, but the Villain League will regroup. Plasma Man isn't the type to stay down for long, and now that you've destroyed their machine, they'll be looking for revenge.
We hit them hard, but we need to be ready for what comes next. They'll come back, and they'll be more dangerous.
You're right. This is only the beginning. But for now, you should rest. You've earned it. Good work tonight, all of you. We'll regroup in the morning and figure out our next move.
The team, though exhausted, felt a sense of pride in their accomplishment. They had taken down the cloning machine and survived a confrontation with some of the most dangerous villains in the world. But they knew this victory was just one step in a much larger war. As they left Carl's office and headed toward the living quarters, Colton looked over at Zach.
Think we'll ever get a mission that doesn't end with one of us almost dying? Not likely. But hey, at least we keep winning. Next time, let's try for fewer windows.
They all laughed, though the weight of what lay ahead still hung over them. There would be no easy victories in this war, but for now, they had bought themselves some time, and that for the moment was enough. The end. S5. Media Group. People resting, team unwinding, group of people relaxing, G-stock you distribute equally, and more rest.